Is it right? Okay, perfect, thank you. We have finished now with all the welcome, and we can start with the real substance of the conference now. So the next speaker will show that the game industry, the game online industry, not so far from our preoccupation to manage a research network. I hope so, at least. So the next speaker is Hilmar and Petursson from CCP Games, a big online company, online game company, and is now Chief Executive Officer of CCP Games in Iceland. He has brought CCP to the forefront of the video game industry as a widely recognized innovator in the areas of virtual world development, publishing, and technology. He was named as one of the 20 most influential people in the MMO industry in 2007 and 2008 by Beckett Massive Online Gamer magazine. Hilmar joined CCP in 2000, firstly as CTO, and he managed the engineering effort necessary to bring EVE Online to life in 2003. He is also an active member of a number of boards and committees relating to Icelandic information, technology, and innovation. He has, like the other speaker, a scientific background. He is Bachelor in Computer Science from the University of Iceland. And as I said during my presentation, he will share his experience from managing the massive 400,000 person multiplayer game EVE Online. He will present the main technical concern he has, the difficulties to organize a good interaction with the vast user communities, and he will share with us the hard-learned lesson from the past. Please, Hilmar, take the floor.
Just briefly, I am Hilmar Petursson, the CEO of CCP. I actually used to sit in this hall decades ago watching a lecture on linear algebra, which took me a while to figure out what was useful for. And I figured that out, so I hope I will be able to explain better what EVE Online is to you, so that you figure out now what it is, and it doesn't take you a decade like it took for me. So welcome to Iceland, the land of eternal sunshine. As you have seen, we have fantastic weather outside, and this is always what it is. And I don't know why they put an umbrella in the bag that you got handed out. This is what it's like. It's always like this, except when there's a volcano. Then it's like this. Iceland also has a wonderful thing called the Icelandic economy, which is a little experimental kitchen which we've been running on this island for 1,000 years. And it's terribly useful to watch some of the ongoings in the Icelandic economy and learn from it to build a better world. So as Steingrímur was mentioning, Iceland is now creeping over 320,000 subscribers. And EVE Online has 400,000 subscribers. So you could take a lot of what has been going on in Iceland and how we have taken that in and done our sort of inspired expression of that when people are fighting with spaceships. You will see ships, you will see a currency called ISK, you will see riots, you will see constitutional assemblies, you will see parliament, and you will see a lot of backstabbing and politicking. All of this we created out of the inspiration that is Iceland. This is the founder of CCP. He has a driver's license. That is his biggest education certificate. And he had this crazy idea of developing EVE Online. And he is quoted, and he hates this picture, I always use of him. He is quoted saying this at some point in time: "Venturing on a project so massive in scope, so unprecedented, and unproven in so many ways is only done by madmen or idiots, and we will probably be both." And I will explain that a little bit. But to give a sort of a short, brief background on what EVE Online is, then I'm going to play a trailer which basically lays out the future vision for EVE Online, because even though the game came out a decade ago, then we see many decades to come for this sort of thriving online experimentation in society. So here we go. If you could dim the lights and raise the volume.
Making the right choices. It's about dealing with the consequences. There's a fine line between right and wrong. You'd better know which side of it you're on.
This is Vanguard 6. We've reached the last checkpoint before the terminus.
Can you take the ground station?
Not without the close air you promised.
You'll have it. Now keep going and do what I'm paying you for.
You just send that airstrike and the money. We'll take care of the rest. Make it over. Move up. Use your jacks. Hey! Come on, get out of there! Where's that goddamn airstrike? We had an agreement. We did all
Airstrike aborted.
There's been a change of plans, Vanguard.
Orbital strike launched.
help isn't coming. At all.
The moment you lose your honor, that's when you learn the hard way. Your choice always comes back around.
So what you saw there are basically sort of images from two computer games, which is EVE Online, and then another game which is coming out this year, which is called Dust 514. So when you saw the spaceships flying around in space, that's EVE Online, that's been in operation for a decade now. And then we're adding a new addition to EVE, which is basically a first-person shooter taking place on consoles. So the fighting on the ground is that game, and then you see EVE Online, and they interconnect, and they together bring one sort of massive experience to its user base. And I will explain that as we go along. But we have to start at the beginning. So this is the first version of EVE Online. That was as the game was in 2000. You see here is a spaceship. It's on a waypoint trajectory. There are planets, there's chat, there's a health bar. And this sort of was the basic premise of the game. And this is basically the way we have gone about the development. We've always done small iterations to the game. And the first one basically started 13 years ago, almost, when EVE Online was in this form. So it took a while to change EVE from that you saw on the screen into what you see in the video. And I'm going to sort of walk you sort of briefly through the timeline. So CCP is actually founded in '97, where a group of people came together, actually from another internet startup here in Iceland called Oz Interactive, which had the plan of changing VRML into basically a 3D version of the internet. And I see some people smiling. Some remember that when VRML was supposed to change the world. And I could say that that mission was about 40 years too early. But still, it got started here in Iceland. And it's kind of funny to remember when that company was started, Iceland was connected to the internet by a modem. So if you started to go online very early in the morning, you had to wait for the country to dial in. And it's kind of crazy to think of having that idea of turning VRML into the 3T internet here. But anyway, a group of people came together to found CCP from that company. And the first product was actually a family board game called the Danger Game, which is about the temptations of teenage life and how you navigate them. Usually, that game is often played the reverse, where people race to the bottom instead of trying to survive as a teenager. And it's a great example of the overall thesis behind CCP and all our products, is that the game should be about the people playing the game. It shouldn't be about the game itself. And you will see more examples of that later on. But anyway, the Danger Game was quite successful and provided the seed capital for the company. It was actually sold in 10,000 copies. And there are only 80,000 homes in Iceland, so 1 in every 8 households has the copy of the Danger Game. And I reminisce about the time when we have that sort of market penetration on a worldwide basis. But CCP also did some projects. We helped define the look of Lazy Town and other such things, which is a great example of the cluster effect that happens in a country when mainly sort of creative industry companies are together. We actually raise capital among private investors in Iceland in 2000. We actually do it a week after the internet bubble bursts. The bubble burst somewhere around end of March, and we do it about a week later. And the news was a little slower in arriving to Iceland, so there was a very sort of hot offering, 4 times oversubscribed, and we could have raised much more money than we did, and we should have. Because I joined the company right around the time of the offering and started to look at the plan. And the plan is to make EVE Online with 5 programmers in 1 year. And I remember in the video you saw, you can see that's quite an ambitious plan to achieve in 1 year. So I said, well, I mean, I need twice the amount of engineers and I need twice the time. So we then start to figure out how we're going to fund that piece of it, the second part of the game. No one really wants to play half a game. So we go through a rough period in 2001, where I can definitely relate to what it feels to be a banker in Iceland right now. Because being an internet worker in Iceland in 2001 was probably felt like the same. The bubble has burst, this internet is going away, it's just a bubble and nothing will come of it. But somehow we were able to noodle together some funds to finish the game, and we make an agreement with Simon & Schuster, which is a US-based publisher, and released the game in 2003. We have some issues with Simon & Schuster, who decide to close down their games division. So we end up in a situation where we have sold the rights and we have to buy them back, and it's a bit of a story on how to sort all that out. But in 2004, we go and basically self-publish EVE Online. We skip with all physical retail, and we just deliver the bits through the internet. And you just sign up your credit card, and you start playing. We were actually the first game, or one of the first games in the West to do this. This, of course, had been done in Korea some years prior. And once we stepped onto that path, then the EVE Online subscriber base has been growing sort of linearly since. We crossed 300,000 subscribers in 2009, and that was the year where we sort of crossed the population of Iceland, which was a big sort of achievement for us. We're like Facebook, we have more users than our country. It's an exclusive club. We announced Dust in 2009 at European GDC. 2010 was a big growth year for us, and 2011 we released a famous expansion to EVE Online, which I will cover later, and this year we're putting our second product online. This is the company today, just briefly, founded in '97, 500 employees worldwide. We have offices in Atlanta in the US, here in Reykjavik, in the UK, and Shanghai. And taking a look at our sort of office infrastructure from a network perspective might actually be an interesting talk for this conference, because it takes a lot to keep this all together, sort of global production, all in same source code repository, video conferencing, time zones, bandwidth management, all this good stuff you know about. So what we basically did with Eve is that we did differently than many games have done before. We set out to make a world, not really a game. And we were going to rely on emergence and continuous evolution to build basically a product that would then be basically a pyramid of social equity that would become the product itself. So if you ask an EVE player today what they value in EVE Online, for sure the graphics are interesting, some of the features are interesting, but they fundamentally value the friends and the enemies they've made within the game. And here's sort of the snapshot of EVE. Now we have 400,000 people that play from every country in the world. So there basically isn't a country in the world that doesn't have an EVE player. Sometimes I want to pick up the phone and call them and just ask, how do you figure out about this game? And the basic backstory is it's dark, it's ruthless, it's a sandbox, and it relies on emergence. EVE Online is from the sort of school of thought where you build a world like a sandbox instead of building it like a theme park. So you might be familiar with World of Warcraft, which is the biggest product in the space. World of Warcraft is a fantastically well-designed theme park where everyone has a good experience. You go online and you kill orcs and you get gold, and you stand in a queue to go into the raid. Then you go through the raid and you get a purple item. Similar to Disneyland, where you go, you have a ride, you get a lollipop, you meet Mickey Mouse, and it's all a lot of fun. But the thing with the theme park is that no one really goes to the theme park to make new friends. That would be kind of creepy, to go to Disneyland to make new friends. But in the playground, that's the sort of flip side model, where you basically build a box of sand, you put some shovels, and then you rely on the kids in the playground to basically come up with games and things to entertain themselves. And that really is what EVE Online has become. It has become this game of here's the sandbox of all this opportunity. Some people decide to build a sandcastle. Other people decide to try to destroy that sandcastle. The kids with the sandcastle, they recruit kids to defend it. And that's really how EVE Online has built up. Because the problem with the sandbox is it has this guy, and the nanny isn't always watching. And we've been sort of localizing EVE lately, so here's that guy. If localization was only this easy. So emergence is what we call the concept when you have built a basic set of framework, and then people build value add on top of that. It's not unlike a country. When Steingrímur is managing Iceland, he focuses on investing in infrastructure and building the framework so that great things can emerge. That is the best way to operate a system. It's not try to force things to happen, but to facilitate their creations through sort of providing good foundations and good tools. And in the context of an MMO, the social network is really what is forming, even though it seems like spaceships and explosions, it's ultimately about people. And social networks are a well-researched and wonderful thing. I mean, the Facebook IPO is a good example of what can get created when you are able to network people together in this type of a way. Up until this point, most games, they've done what is called a sharded approach. So that, again, taking the example of World of Warcraft, because it's so well known, if you're playing World of Warcraft and you meet someone at a conference like this and they're also playing it, it's very unlikely that you are playing on the same shard. So you have no direct ability to interact. We took the reverse approach, which was a very difficult one. It took us basically a decade to figure out, is to allow everyone to play in the same world. And to explain a little bit what happens once you have built this up, when you have built tools in a sandbox, in a single shard, where everyone can affect each other, then wonderful things start to happen. So what I have here on the screen is basically the solar system map of EVE Online. And I'm going to tell you a story which happened in its first year. This happened in 2003. when Emaline is released. And during this period, we're mostly just in our office at Klapparstígur fixing all the bugs that we left in the game. So we didn't even know when it was going out. It took archaeology to figure out what actually happened in our own world. So what you see here is basically every dot on the screen is a solar system. So Emaline is a system of 5,000 solar systems that are connected through stargates. So there's a bit of a landscape to the world. And there is also a landscape of safety. So here in the center, the world is safe. There is computer-controlled police that is going to intervene if someone is going to attack another player. But out here in the outskirts, then there are no police. There's actually computer-controlled pirates. So if somebody wants to claim that territory, they have to band together and push them out. So in the beginning, it was interesting to see that people tend to group here to be able to push out the pirates. So there was a bit of a war of the nations in the beginning. So in the beginning, we had a lot of people from Russia over here, with a lot of people from Scandinavia over here. Here we had a lot of people from France and sort of Benelux countries and Germany. And up here we had the Americans. And it was really interesting to watch the Russians. The game is very popular in Russia. There's something about darkness and space and world domination that appeals to them. And they're also quite skilled in playing it, and they're also very technically skilled. So what they had done, they had hacked the Eve client so that you would be able to type in Cyrillic font. We didn't have Unicode support, so there was this Russian hack to be able to speak in Russian in the game. But that basically meant if you had applied the Russian hack to your client, you couldn't really talk to anyone else, because if you spoke English in the client, you just saw like triangles and gibberish, and it made no sense. So the only language the Russians had to communicate with others was violence, which they were very good at. They were very good at playing the game. And their next door neighbors here, the Scandinavians, they were the recipients of the communication from the Russians. There was a lot of communication going on here between these two regions. And the Russians didn't really figure out why they weren't winning the Scandinavians. They had the numbers, they knew the game better, they were better organized. And it wasn't really until the Russians figured out that it was the Americans that were secretly funding the Scandinavians. So like a big supply line of ships and ammunition flowing from up here down to the Scandinavians. All the while, the Americans were saying, we're just a peaceful manufacturing alliance. We don't want this war business. Guns don't kill people and all that. And it wasn't really until the Russians go and convinced the French to go and attack the Americans, thus breaking the supply lines, and thus the Russians were able to have a momentary victory over the Scandinavians. And this is something that plays out in half a year and is played out in the game, on the internet, with propaganda, with espionage and false information, with treaties and treaties being founded and broken and all that. It's about 15,000 people that participate in the war out here, and there's about 15,000 people in here that just watch it and trying to figure out really what's going on. And this is really what happens when you really relinquish control and you rely on the inhabitants of your world to really come up with something way more interesting than what you could think of. Now, today, I mean, you can just imagine when this was happening, there were 30,000 people playing the game. Now there are 400,000 people playing the game. So the amount of drama and excitement that occurs is something that's almost impossible to follow unless you play it very aggressively. It's sort of like trying to follow everything that's going on in our world all the time. So to help with this, there has been sort of media formed. So there's a quarterly magazine called Ion, which is published every quarter. And incidentally, it would be the highest selling magazine in Iceland if you were to look at it like that. There's a television station that broadcasts sports matches on the internet, which has about sort of up to 30,000 people watching it. Here you see a picture of the set. These are commentators which are commenting on what's going on in the match, just as if you were to watch a cricket match or something like that. Something that wouldn't make any sense unless you had commentators sort of explaining it to you. So this all sounds very interesting in theory. So how has it been sort of supporting this? As you can just imagine, building an infrastructure for 400,000 people connecting from all over the world into one piece of supercomputer which resides in London. It couldn't be placed here in Iceland because we didn't have the infrastructure then. Might be now that we're reinvesting in that. So what has been our way to sort of support this? One of the key elements is that we're constantly evolving it. So we have invested way more in research and development into EVE after it got released than before it got released. I think the ratio is more than 20 times. 20 times of the amount of this investment has gone into EVE post the release than prior to the release. And here I list out some of the expansions. This is, of course, a bit too small to read. But just to give a sense, every 6 months, there's a new sort of iteration and refinement coming out of EVE, where we refine some of the user interface, where we work on sort of technical issues such as latency and things like that, so that people can have bigger and bigger fights, where we add new features, and we work on the sort of governance infrastructure of the game. That has been a very sort of interesting way to follow that. So if I lay out here the timeline and the size of the subscriber base, then initially, when we released the game, we controlled the prices on the market. So if you wanted to buy a mineral on the market, then we actually were market makers. We sold minerals and we bought minerals off the market. And in sort of and in the beginning, we actually, sort of 2003 and 4, we took that out of the game, so we completely left the control to the players. And now mineral prices and all that fluctuate based on who is waging war, who is doing what in the game. We formed alliances in 2004, which is a large social organization that holds together multiple corporations so that you can have a leader in EVE Online that leads 20,000 people. Some of them even have like a SMS call tree so that they can order 20,000 people to come online to go and defend a part of EVE. There's a radio station that gets formed in 2006, television station. We hire a professor of economics in 2007 to manage the economy and sort of issue reports and explain to people what's going on. In 2008, we actually form a democratically elected representative council from EVE Online that comes to CCP every year and talks about what are the sort of trends in the game and where we need to focus our development effort. And we released EVE Gate, which is sort of like a Facebook for EVE users in 2009, and so on. The economic complexity, which has really sort of risen. I have here a funny picture of AO, who is the guy who manages sort of monitoring the economy. He doesn't really control the economy. It's more about figuring out where problems are, where we need to incentivize small businesses to invest in this area. And he does this through communication and reports with the player base. This is the Council of Stellar Management. So it's basically 9 people which are elected by the EVE player base. They fly to Iceland twice a year. They sit down with our game designers and producers and engineers to sort of give their view on how we should apply our priorities and where are things that need to get improved in the game. And this is the election participation in the vote for the Council of Stellar Management. So we basically see 18% of EVE Online subscribers voted to participate in who gets to sit on the Council of Stellar Management. And I don't have a European example, but I have this example from America, where the voting participation in EVE Online is higher than participating in the vote for who gets to be in the Republican Party as their presidential candidate. So you could draw the conclusion that people care more about their virtual world than their real world. Maybe it would. Yeah, you said it, not me. And just to give you an example of what goes on, so in 2011, CCP, I would admit, went a little bit off its tracks, and we were making developments with the game which are not aligned with the expectations of the community. So there was a big riot in one of the market hubs of the game called Jira. So there's this monument, which you see here, where about 5,000 people came into this part of the game, and they shot on this monument for a week to protest the developments of the game. It was not unlike a sort of an Occupy Wall Street type of a movement. So what we did as a response, we flew in the Council of Stellar Management, had a summit a week long to come up with what were the sort of key elements and how we could address this, which we then reprioritized our development efforts and have been running onto those priorities since. And now there's a monument in the game. Here's the sort of the monument being broken as part of this having taken place. So this is a sort of coding the history as it happens. In 2012, we had another similar event, but this time it was different. This time it was the people in the outer regions, where I was talking about before, the Scandinavians and the Russians, and that war against the people in the safe part of the world. So the people in the hard part of the world, they were attacking the people in the safe part who they say, this is too cozy, this is not the way to play EVE Online. So they did the Burn Jira event. And here we see basically these are basically an overlay of how many spaceships were destroyed in an individual solar system. So as the balloon is bigger and more intense, then you can see where ships got destroyed. And you see here is the Jita area, and there was you see it, there are about 2,000 ships that got destroyed in a single day, which is a lot. And usually this was the safe part of EVE. Even to the point where we had to issue like a public advisory. So when you logged into EVE Online when this was going on, then we had to warn people there's something going on in the game. So brace yourself for that. And again, because we don't really control what's going on in the game, it's controlled by the players, and that becomes a way more interesting world. Here we see basically the dip they were able to cause. So these are the numbers of market orders placed in the Jita trade hub every day. And as you see, there's a lot of trade going on. There's about 300,000 trades that go into the system every day of the year. And here you see the dip as the sort of Jita burning moment was taking place. And then there was an interesting counter movement called the Save Jita movement. So there were these two big factions of play styles in the game that were basically fighting each other about how the game should be played. And to the point where you see such a dip in the sort of behavioral, if you were to look at this as a behavioral economist, this would be a fertile ground to figure out how big crowds move and how they behave. Also, as we have gone now into a decade of EVE, we are now evolving the game beyond just what it is in terms of spaceships fighting in EVE Online. And of course, we've done what many companies have done. There are now books available. There are sort of short-form internet movies. There will probably be a movie at some point. So we're developing the intellectual property behind the service. Also, we've been refining a lot what the people look inside EVE, because the game is basically, if you were to look at the trailer, you think, oh, okay, it's like a game about spaceships. But ultimately, it's a game about people. So the way that people look and how you define your online identity is a really big part of it. So here's an example of some of the changes we brought into the game. Here's a character customization system that basically allows every single EVE player to develop a unique look for themselves. So through this sort of character creator, you can sculpt your face, you can change the way your nose looks, you can apply various type of makeup, and this is something that a lot of people spend a lot of time on, defining their online identity. It's an interesting anecdote that, as you would maybe guess, the majority of the players are men. There's about 95% of the players are men, but half of the characters in the game are women. So half of the players are cross-dressing. So I don't know what that says, but this was a massive thing that we invested in. Actually, it took a lot of company resources to pull off. But we were doing that because we have built this platform, basically a technology platform that powers EVE Online and will also power Dust. And it's also powering our third game called World of Darkness. And that basically allows us to invest in things like this that isn't necessarily the most requested feature of EVE Online, but certainly is a big part of World of Darkness. I'm going to show you another sort of development which is relating to this. Here you see basically a research project between CCP and NVIDIA to allow natural clothing inside the virtual world. Usually clothing is hand animated and it doesn't react dynamically to the environment. So you see here the girl is hand animated through a skeleton, but all the twirling of the dress is done through sort of secondary procedural animation done through sort of a end-body cloth dynamics system that's inside the dress. Again, the linear algebra example. When I sat there not knowing what it was useful, it's terribly useful for this. Here you see a different example. It's the same motion, a different dress. And it shows here, you see how the scarf twirls around. That's runtime calculated as the movement underneath is applied. And here you see the dress interacting with the environment. Usually this looks very artificial when you look at sort of modern day computer games. So this is sort of what we're leveraging into it and allows us to do that because of the sort of underlying technology platform. We're able to invest in this technology, which is then returns on its investment through multiple products. So Dust. Dust is a game we're about to release this year. It entered closed beta December last year and has been ongoing since. And we hope to turn it open to everyone later this year. There we're addressing an interesting part because EVE Online is a very hard game to play. If there's anyone here that has tried to play it, you might have been met with a learning cliff that the game has become notorious for. So rather than try to change that, because that's something that 400,000 people have grown to love that game, rather than try to change that game, then we wanted to sort of capture the interest of everyone that's heard about EVE, thinks it's an interesting world, this sandbox, emergent, open society is a really interesting thing. I want to be a part of that, but I don't enjoy the particular game style of EVE. So we thought, what we're going to do about that? And we had the idea to basically make a first-person shooter on a console that we then connect into the world of EVE. And there we basically take this concept of an ever-expanding universe, and we basically sort of build two different experiences within that universe, which are each sort of compelling in their own right, but they come together through a connection between the two games. Because we want to stay true to our principle of allowing people to build this one massive social network. So rather than try to teach everyone in the world to try to learn how to play EVE Online, which is a very particular style of game, then we've added this different type of game which you now can join, and you can enjoy that game, but you're still part of that world. So in the future, when Dust is online, you will be able to have corporations funding alliances. So if you were to play a war like I showed before with the Russians and the Scandinavians next year, then you would also have to recruit people fighting on the ground, fighting in spaceships, and you would have to orchestrate a war with hundreds of thousands of people to really sort of build your empire to dominate the world. The games are connected on multiple levels. One of it is that there's a space elevator, so you can basically take an elevator from space down to a planet and vice versa. That's one of the future features. Another big component is called orbital strike, where you're able to bombard from orbit, which you saw in the first video. And I now have here another video which basically shows you what you will be able to experience from the Dust side, where you will be able to sort of fight back from that angle of the game. So if you could raise the audio again.
us we had no chance. That we were fools to even try. But I'm a mercenary. I don't judge your ambitions. I only judge what you can afford. Pay my price, and I'll strike down the heavens. I've fought your war 1,000 times and won them all. And I know this is the moment that will change everything. On this day, the blood I spill will bring down an empire, and the world will burn before your very eyes. They will remember us, and they'll remember what happened here. On this battlefield, one shot can change the course of history. And you're going to be the one that takes it.
So there we basically saw the mercenaries fighting back from down on the ground playing Dust. Dust is actually now in closed beta, so you can sign up if you want to try and have a PlayStation, because this is a very complicated thing to get working. So we're basically spending a year to tune the two games so that they can sort of enter into the sort of lockstep development for next year. So it's a bit of a science experiment in the making, if you want to be a part of it. So again, supporting emergence. If we thought it was crazy enough to have the whole world play on this one supercomputer in London and everyone together, then yet again we're at another sort of transition moment in the company's history. How can we have people with Twitch level accuracy play together from all around the world? Because as I'm pretty sure you have figured out, a big piece of the way that we're able to make this work for EVE is that it's spaceships and they move slowly. So the game can already tolerate up to half a second of latency. So if you think of the internet topology, the last mile and all that, and the level of latency you have to be able to sort of play with so that you can allow people to play together on a global scale in a competitive manner, then the trick is a little bit, because it's like submarines in syrup, which is basically sort of the dynamic model for EVE. But now we're doing it with first-person Twitch level accuracy. So when it comes to that, then basically how we think of EVE today and how we think of the sort of ecosystem that's getting created with EVE and Dust coming online, we basically think of the EVE universe almost like a cloud. If you think of sort of cloud gaming and that, which is quite the buzzword right now, which mainly focuses on sort of cloud delivery when it comes to the bits. So there are services such as OnLive and Gaikai, which basically allow you to stream any game to any device. But we think of this in a different sense of cloud gaming. So we have this sort of persistent supercomputer here at the top, which basically stores all the connection, all the activity in EVE Online, or the EVE universe, which you can basically experience in EVE Online on a Mac or a PC, or you can experience Dust on a PlayStation 3. Already there are even applications which have been written for iOS and Android devices which connect into the cloud, and they take information out of it through an API gateway we have provided, and they present users with it on a mobile device. And we're now opening up an ability for those applications to write back into the world. So not only will you see EVE Online and Dust, but you will also see an ecosystem of third-party developed applications which will connect and add value and derive value from the EVE universe. How we make all of this work is basically EVE Online in its sort of core works such that any user that wants to connect to EVE Online is connected to a proxy server. Initially, the plan was to geographically distribute the proxy servers, but they're currently all located in London. We might push them out to the edges later on if we need to do that as the services scale. And then the proxies, they basically they connect into the sort of simulation layer, where we have simulation nodes within the cloud which simulate a solar system, corporation node, character node, fleet fighting node, market node, etc. So that every time a user wants to shoot another player, it goes to the proxy into where the solar system simulation is, goes back, forth. If there is a economical transaction, then it's written to the database. This we then use to have basically 400,000 people play the same game at the same time. And the peak concurrent user record is about 65,000 people connecting into the cluster at the same time. So all of this is stored somewhere in the Docklands area, and it's called Tranquility, which is the name of the cluster in the world that all of this sort of happens in. So now when you think about it, that we are potentially going to have millions of people from all over the world are going to participate in this simulation through their PlayStation 3. Then we thought about how to solve for that. And then we thought of the concept of basically distributing what are called battle servers around the world. And then people will start to fight battles on battle servers which are close to them in proximity. So you would have people in America mostly connecting to this battle server and vice versa. And then what will happen is that the Vault of Eve, which is basically mapping all the planets of EVE Online over to this internet topology. So that as people were to be fighting, the strategic advantage you would have through low latency would mean that you generally are fighting in the same area of the world. So that we would create almost like a mapping function from the internet topology and the latency distribution over to the landscape of EVE Online. And then slowly, a Mars base would start to map over to America, Caldari to Japan, etc. That means you can still fight across the latency barrier, but then you're at a disadvantage. It's a little bit like fighting a war in another country, which usually the one attacking has a disadvantage to the one defending. So we're able to basically offer anyone Twitch-based gameplay. They start to sort of congeal around where you basically map this world to this world. And at some point, I hope to even be able to draw an analogous example where each of the solar systems has basically mapped over to the battle servers in each of the places of the world we have picked. I know it's a little complicated to explain in 5 minutes because it took us a decade to figure out how to come up with an approach. But this is why we're taking a year to basically sort of operate the game prior to it going online. So out of this, we see an increasing world which live in this cloud, which you interact with multiple products, each sort of affecting a globally available transition state in a sandbox with a social network on top, relying on emergence and economies to build basically a fully featured virtual world. So this is where we've come from this to what I just described. It has taken us 10 years to go to this point, and it will probably take us another 10 years to fully implement everything I've laid out in this plan, but this is the plan we're about to embark upon. Because we have this notion that EVE is something that can go on forever. It's not really a computer game that sort of comes and goes. It's not a product you buy and at some point it's deprecated. It's a service that's going to operate forever. And that's our commitment to it. And we believe if we keep it fresh, if we keep innovating, if we keep adding modern technology to it and sort of different behavioral styles and what people like to do, then this is something that started in 2003 and can basically go on forever. That is, if we don't drop the ball and we mismanage the operation of it, we don't adopt to new technologies or new business models, etc. But the plan is to have it go on forever. And unfortunately, we've lost Steingrímur, but here's a little example for those who are Icelandic here. Somewhere way back, the Icelandic government said the plan for economic growth in Iceland is based on IT. And the Central Bank of Iceland started to monitor statistics about how that plan was moving along. And they used export of software and computer services as their sort of metric. So as you see here in the 90s, it was low. It was basically 31 million ISK, which is not a lot of money. And then it has grown. I contacted the Central Bank and I asked them to provide the ratio of what EVE Online is part of that export. So you see in 2007, then about 40% of all exports from Iceland of computer and software services was this computer game. And here I made my own projections. Something happened in 2008, and the central bank has been busy with the whole things, so they aren't really recording the information anymore. The economic situation, let them focus on something else. And sometimes when I have government in the audience, I do something like this, like with Eve, without Eve, with Eve, without Eve. And it's like, na, 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 na. But it's not really about that. It's not really about me bragging about Eve Online. This is really about showing what difference one company can make for a country like Iceland. So imagine if in this period where Iceland was very focused on building crazy-sized banks, if we were to have focused on doing something like this, and we were to have 2 or 3 CCPs, because CCP throughout all this period has grown, the economic collapse didn't really affect us. It was actually the cure with coercion controls and all that, which was way worse for us than the actual collapse. The collapse didn't really affect us, but the cure is very bad for us. But if we were to have built up more companies like that in that period, that could be leverage for investment to sort of put into those seats. But unfortunately, during this period, there was a drought of startup companies in Iceland because the banks, they basically sucked all energy out of the economy in terms of people and money and interest and all that. So as we now lay out a new plan for Iceland, it's good to see this as an example, because we see all nations around us are focusing on this, creating incentives and create investment programs to build more of this, because one company can make a lot of difference. So that was about it, but I wanted to end with one more thing. We're actually now releasing tomorrow a new expansion of Eve. So as I laid out, then we do an expansion to Eve every single year. And I have now a promotional trailer for it, which actually has never been shown before. It's going to be shown for the first time later this year. So you're the first one in the world to see this, apart from people at CCP. So here you go. Raise the volume again.
Progress. What is it? Out here, progress is numbers. Millimeters, kilometers, head counts, death tolls. This is progress. Colonies burned, ships destroyed, people killed, money earned. It all comes at a price. And if the price is right, I'll set the universe on fire.
Thank you. Should we take questions or? Yes. Okay. So I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. There's one. I'll just repeat if you, I'll probably hear you.
Okay. So since this is a networking conference, it seems that you are basically trying to deal with the internet as it is today, with latency, limited bandwidth.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just. Hello.
Okay.
So this is a networking conference. So I was wondering.
I'm going to guess the question. So since this is a networking conference and we're working with the public internet as it stands today, if I had like a magical wand, what would I wish for? Is that the question?
Kind of.
Okay.
So how much are you? How much do you have to deal with those limitations? And yes, I guess what would you do differently if you had unlimited bandwidth and zero latency?
Yeah. So I mean, when you build a business on the internet, you basically have to deal with what you have. Like building based on something that's gonna come. Well, I mean that's a good sort of a startup motive to try to take a new technology and run with it. But what we decided to do, based on having worked at a company that was trying to use VRML to change the world, and none of the infrastructure existed, then we just said when we went to CCP, okay, what was broken at the other company? It was the business model, it was the infrastructure, and it was a product that was very nebulous. So we said, okay, how do we fix that? Well, business model is simple, you subscribe to the game. It is not a big leap to think that hardcore gamers are interested in having modems and connect to the internet to play a game, because it's already happening. And we will work around the limitations of the internet by accepting a second of latency, and then we'll do basically a distributed simulation system to work around that. And since then, very little has happened in terms of what can you actually assume. A lot has happened in the sort of private networking space, where I mean now I have a global company that basically operates as a people in the same location through video conferencing and virtual networks and bandwidth on demand and all those fancy things. Unfortunately, it's very hard to take them and turn them into a product for a global market. You can take it into a product for a limited set of audiences, and you see some of the phone companies doing that, turning sort of value-added services on top of the infrastructure they have, but it never really gets any scale. And I once sat on the sort of advisory board for TeliaSonera, so I understand how they were thinking about it. But it really, the value becomes, like I provide the service on the internet, and as it relates to the subject of the conference, then I provide the service. This is what I have to do today, because there is nothing else offered. But if I had a way to buy guaranteed end-to-end delivery to a set of users, then I know I have compelling enough content for them to pay me premium for being that delivered to them, because they value it more than just the general products on the internet. I mean, no one really wants to pay for YouTube, but it's awesome that YouTube is here, and maybe they can develop a business model on it, but no one really relates to it as such. I mean, if YouTube is broken, you call your phone company, you don't call YouTube. If Eve is broken, they call us. They don't like, it is my fault if Eve is not working for them. And I have to explain, well, there was this node over here that crashed, and now we're being rerouted over here. Like, bullshit. I don't want to hear about it, Hilmar. I want to play your game. I pay you for it. So if there was a way for me to buy something which is end-to-end delivery, then I could provide a more compelling service. But unfortunately, there is no way to go from my peering in a tier 1 to a tier 2 to an incumbent to a modem into a person's house, because no one will agree on it. And there's an endless debate on, like, are the tier 1s paying for the transit? Are the local because they have the customer base? Are we buying a gaming connection that's low latency and all that? And it just isn't working. But what I would say, if I could buy such a product on a global scale, I would be able to charge people for it and provide them with a more compelling experience. So if all of you can figure out a model to allow such a delivery mechanism to start to make standards and compliance sense, then I have a product for it. More questions? There's one.
We're seeing a lot of applications, and I'm not just talking about games, but the internet is now good enough that a lot of the applications we used to use offline now work very well online. But that leaves a problem for the few people who at a given time or another can't get online. They suddenly can't access the application they wanted at all. And like I say, I'm not just talking about games, but I am talking about Diablo 3. Do you have any comment on the assertion that maybe this isn't so great for the user?
I mean, obviously it's not great for the user. And like I said before, because it is not great for the user, then we decided to work with a basic level of assumption we can work on, which is basically everyone can pretty much connect to London with a 1 second of latency. And which doesn't always hold true, by the way. Sometimes even that assumption is broken. So as people are taking more of these experiences to the cloud, and there is no way to guarantee delivery, because there is no way to buy quality of service throughout the end-to-end on a global scale, then what will probably happen is that people start to regionalize, and you have to sort of push it down, and you don't really get the value when it truly sort of ascends to a global service delivered to the world end-to-end, which is what we're trying to do with Eve. So what I would guess happens is that as these models come online more and more, and there is no way to get end-to-end delivery, then people will get unhappy customers, and their reaction is going to be to figure out what we can make out of the fragment we have today, so that you can have sort of localized quality of service delivery sort of pockets to be able to have those sort of competitive experiences, whether it's a game or whether it's a productivity application. That would be my guess. More questions? Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you.